Karen's perfectly manicured finger trembled as she dialed 911, her voice sharp with indignation. "There are thieves stealing my water." But when Officer Martinez arrived and checked the city records, his face went pale. The sprinkler system, Karen had been guarding like a fortress for 3 years, the one she'd screamed at neighbors for, called the police about, and even installed cameras to protect it and belong to her property, it never had. And the real owner, the quiet immigrant family she'd been terrorizing, lived right next door, paying the water bill this whole time while she hurled slurs and threats. Now, with the entire neighborhood watching and body cameras rolling, Karen was about to discover that sometimes the person you're trying to destroy owns everything. The morning sun, cast long shadows across Maple Street as Karen Weatherby adjusted her designer sunglasses and surveyed her domain. From the front porch of 1247 Maple, everything had to be perfect. The mailbox gleamed with fresh black paint, the American flag hung at precisely the right angle, and most importantly, her sprinkler system was running exactly on schedule, 7 a.m. to 7:15 a.m. every Tuesday and Friday, just as it had for the past 3 years. Absolutely not. Karen's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Get away from my property." Maria Santos looked up from where she knelt beside the flower bed that bordered both yards, her weathered hands still clutching a small watering can. At 62, Maria had learned to move quietly through the world, but this morning she couldn't remain silent. Her grandchildren were visiting, and she wanted the garden to be beautiful for them. "Mrs. Weatherby," Maria said in heavily accented English, standing slowly and brushing dirt from her knees. I don't care what you're just doing," Karen snapped, marching down her pristine walkway. "That's my water system, and I'm sick of you people thinking you can just help yourselves to whatever you want." Maria's son, David, emerged from the house at 1245 Maple, his hair still messy from sleep. At 28, he worked double shifts at the hospital to help support his mother and save for his own place. He'd heard this argument too many times. "Mom, just come inside," he said in Spanish, then switched to English as he faced Karen. "She's not hurting anything, it's just flowers." Karen's face flushed red. "Don't tell me what's hurting anything. This is America, speak English, or go back where you came from. And keep your mother away from my sprinkler system." David stepped protectively in front of his mother. "Look, lady, we're not trying to cause problems. We've been neighbors for 3 years. Can't we just neighbors?" Karen's laugh was harsh. "You've been thieves for 3 years. Every time I see her over there with her little watering can, getting free water from my system, do you know how much my water bill has gone up because of you people?" Mrs. Henderson from across the street paused her morning walk, her small dog yapping at the commotion. 2 houses down, Tom Bradley stopped mowing his lawn, the engine idling as he watched the confrontation unfold. "I pay for water," Maria said, quietly, her voice barely audible. "I show you bills. I don't want to see your fake bills." Karen's voice rose to a shriek. "I've had enough. I'm calling the police." She stormed back toward her house, pulling her phone from her designer purse. David called after her. "Come on, this is ridiculous. She's an old woman watering flowers." But Karen was already dialing, her fingers stabbing at the numbers with righteous fury. The phone rang twice before a calm voice answered. 911. "Your emergency?" "Yes. I need police at 1247 Maple Street immediately. There are thieves stealing my water, and they're getting aggressive with me." The operator's voice remained professional. "Ma'am, can you describe the nature of the theft?" "They're using my sprinkler system. The Mexican family next door has been stealing water from my property for years, and now they're threatening me when I try to stop them." David heard enough to understand what was happening. "She's calling the cops on you?" he asked his mother in Spanish. Maria nodded, her face pale. She'd lived through enough to know how these situations could go wrong. "Mijo, maybe we should go inside." But David was angry now. 3 years of this woman's harassment. 3 years of watching his mother flinch every time she stepped outside. 3 years of being called names and told to go back where you came from. He'd kept quiet because his mother begged him to, because he knew getting involved with police could complicate their lives in ways they couldn't afford. "No, Mom, I'm done hiding." Karen was still on the phone, her voice getting louder as she described the aggressive behavior and theft to the dispatcher. "They're probably illegal. I want them arrested." "Ma'am, officers are on their way." Please remain calm and don't engage with the individuals until police arrive." But Karen was far from calm. She ended the call and stood on her porch like a general surveying a battlefield. "I warned you," she shouted. "The police are coming, and you're going to jail." More neighbors had emerged. Mrs. Chen from the corner house stood in her doorway, shaking her head. The Johnsons, a young black couple who'd moved in 6 months ago, watched from their window. Everyone on Maple Street knew Karen Weatherby, and everyone had their own stories about her complaints, her demands, her certainty that she was the unofficial mayor of their quiet suburban block. "David," Maria tugged at her son's sleeve. "Please, let's go inside." The police will see she's crazy," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. He'd heard too many stories, seen too many news reports. His mother had papers. They both did. But that didn't always matter when a white woman was crying theft and you were brown. Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, waiting. She'd documented everything: dates, times, descriptions of the theft. She had photos on her phone of Maria near the sprinkler system, security camera footage, a detailed log of when she'd observed the criminal activity. She'd even measured the water pressure drop in her own system, convinced it was because of the unauthorized usage. Next door, 10 minutes felt like an hour. The entire neighborhood seemed to hold its breath as they waited for the police to arrive. Maria retreated to her small garden, her hands shaking as she pretended to tend to her plants. David remained on the lawn, his jaw clenched, his mind racing through every possible scenario. Finally, a police cruiser rounded the corner, its white and blue paint gleaming in the morning sun. Officer Martinez stepped out, adjusting his uniform as he surveyed the scene. At 45, he'd been on the force for 15 years and had responded to more neighbor disputes than he could count. But something about this call had bothered him, the way the caller had emphasized the neighbor's ethnicity. The accusation of theft over a water system. "Ma'am," he called to Karen, who was already walking toward him with the confident stride of someone who believed herself to be absolutely in the right. "I'm Officer Martinez. You called about a theft." "Yes, finally." Karen's voice was breathless. "With vindication, they've been stealing water from my sprinkler system for 3 years. I've told them to stop, but they keep coming back. This morning, the mother was right there again, and when I confronted her, the son got aggressive and threatened me." Officer Martinez looked across the yard at David and Maria, who stood together beside their modest home. Something in their posture, the way the older woman seemed to be trying to make herself invisible, the way the young man stood protectively but with careful distance, told him there was more to this story. "What kind of threats, ma'am?" "He told me I couldn't stop them. He said they had a right to the water." "And look," Karen pulled out her phone, swiping through photos. "I have documentation, dates, times, everything. They come over here when they think I'm not watching and use my system to water their plants. My water bill has tripled because of them." Officer Martinez studied the photos, then looked at the property line. The sprinkler system was clearly visible, a series of pop-up heads that watered what appeared to be a shared flower bed between the two properties. "Sir," he called to David, "can you come over here, please?" David approached slowly, his hands visible, his movements deliberate. He'd been trained by necessity and experience to be careful around police, especially when a white woman was making accusations. "She says you've been using her water system. Can you tell me your side?" "Officer, my mother has been living here for 3 years. She pays her water bill, she minds her own business, and she's never stolen anything from anyone. That woman," he gestured toward Karen, "has been harassing us since the day we moved in. She's called us names, told us to go back where we came from, and now she's calling the police because my mother was watering flowers. They're using my sprinkler system," Karen interjected. "Look at the property lines. That system is clearly on my side." Officer Martinez studied the layout more carefully. The sprinkler system did appear to be positioned closer to Karen's property, but the flower bed it watered seemed to span both yards. He'd need to check the property records to be sure. "Ma'am, do you have documentation that this sprinkler system belongs to you? Installation records, permits, anything like that?" Karen hesitated for just a moment. "Well, it's been here since I moved in 3 years ago. It's obviously mine. It's watering my plants." "Actually," David said quietly, "we might have some records. My MO." The Maple Street Community Facebook group exploded at 11:47 a.m. That woman has been terrorizing the Santos family for years. Wait, what happened? One missed? She called the cops on Maria Santos for stealing water, and it turns out Karen was the one who was wrong the whole time within hours. The video was everywhere. Mrs. Chen's teenage grandson had filmed Karen's arrest from his bedroom window, and the footage spread across social media platforms like wildfire. The caption read, "Racist Karen discovers the sprinkler system she's been protecting belongs to her immigrant neighbor. She'd been allowed one phone call, and she'd used it to contact her lawyer, Richard Pemberton, who'd been handling her HOA complaints and property disputes for the past 5 years. Richard, you have to get me out of here," she whispered into the phone. Acutely aware of the other women in the cell who were watching her with undisguised curiosity, "This is all a misunderstanding. Karen, I've seen the video. Half the city has seen the video. You were arrested for harassment and filing a false police report. This isn't a misunderstanding, this is a criminal matter. But I didn't know." How was I supposed to know that sprinkler system wasn't mine? It's been running for 3 years. Richard's silence stretched long enough that Karen wondered if the call had been disconnected. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, professional. "Karen, I need you to think very carefully about your interactions with Mrs. Santos. Have you used any ... inflammatory language? Made any statements that could be construed as racially motivated?" Karen's blood ran cold. The 911 call, the neighbors who'd witnessed her confrontations. "I may have said some things in the heat of the moment. But Richard, you know me. I'm not racist. I was just protecting my property that wasn't yours. I didn't know that. Karen, the DAS office, is already talking about this case. It's not just harassment anymore. They're considering hate crime charges." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Hate crime, Richard. That's impossible. I'm a pillar of this community. I volunteer at the library fundraiser. I organize the neighborhood watch. And you spent 3 years harassing a family because of their ethnicity while falsely claiming ownership of their property. The optics are ... challenging." Meanwhile, across town, David sat in his mother's small kitchen. Channel 7 had picked up the story, and the reporter was standing in front of their house describing the shocking turn of events on Maple Street. "Mijo, maybe we should go stay with your cousin for a few days," Maria said, peering through the curtains at the growing crowd of reporters and neighbors. "This is too much attention." David looked up from the screen, where comments were pouring in faster than he could read them. Most were supportive, but there were people defending Karen. "We didn't do anything wrong. For 3 years, we've been quiet. We've been polite. We've let that woman walk all over us because we were afraid of exactly this kind of attention. But now everyone knows the truth." Maria sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "The truth doesn't always protect people like us, David. You know this." A knock at the door interrupted them. David looked through the peephole to see a young woman in a professional suit holding a business card and a briefcase. "My name is Jennifer Walsh from the ACLU. I wondered if we could talk." David opened the door cautiously. "About what?" "About your rights. About what happened this morning, and about holding people accountable for patterns of harassment based on race and ethnicity." As Jennifer settled into their living room, she pulled out a thick folder. This isn't her first complaint against neighbors of color. In fact, she's filed 17 different complaints with the city over the past 3 years, and 15 of them were against residents who are Black, Latino, or Asian. She spread out copies of official documents. Noise complaints against the Johnsons for playing music during the day at reasonable volumes. Multiple calls to code enforcement about the Chen family's vegetable garden, claiming it was unsightly. David stared at the papers. She's been doing this to everyone who doesn't look like her. But your case is different because she falsely claimed ownership of your property and called police with false accusations. That's not just harassment, that's a federal civil rights violation. Maria had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "What does this mean for us?" Jennifer leaned forward. "It means you have the right to seek justice, not just criminal justice, civil justice. Karen Weatherby has been using the police and city services as weapons against her neighbors. That's illegal, and it's costly both to you and to the city." The intake officer had confiscated her phone, but news of her arrest had already reached her workplace. As a compliance officer at Heritage Bank. She'd been required to disclose any arrests or criminal charges. Her supervisor, Marcus Thompson, had left 3 messages with her emergency contact. Her bail hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m., and Richard had warned her that the prosecutor was likely to request a high bail amount due to the public interest in the case. Your Honor, Assistant District Attorney Carmen Rodriguez addressed Judge Patricia Kim. The defendant has engaged in a systematic pattern of harassment against her neighbors, culminating in a false police report that wasted city resources and could have resulted in serious consequences for the victims. The state requests bail be set at $50,000. Richard stood quickly. Your Honor, my client is a longtime resident with no prior criminal record. She's not a flight risk, and this was a misunderstanding about property lines. A misunderstanding that lasted 3 years and involved documented racial harassment. Judge Kim's voice was sharp. I've reviewed the initial police report, Mr. Pemberton. Your client specifically mentioned her neighbor's ethnicity to the 911 dispatcher and accused them of being illegal. This goes far beyond a property dispute. Karen felt the walls closing in. In the gallery behind her, she could see faces she recognized, neighbors from Maple Street, people she'd considered friends, people who'd listened to her complaints about the problems on their block. Now they were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to disgust. Bail is set at $75,000, Judge Kim announced. The defendant is ordered to have no contact with the victims and to stay at least 500 feet from their residence. As the bailiff led her back to the holding cell, Karen caught sight of David and Maria entering the courthouse with their lawyer. Maria looked smaller than Karen remembered, frailer, and for the first time, the afternoon news cycle was brutal. Heritage Bank released a statement that Karen had been suspended pending the outcome of legal proceedings. The HOA board, which she'd chaired for 2 years, called an emergency meeting to discuss her removal. The library fundraiser committee quietly dropped her name from their volunteer list. I just wanted to grow flowers for my grandchildren, Maria said in heavily accented English, her voice barely above a whisper. I water them every morning and every evening. They are simple flowers, marigolds, and petunias. Nothing expensive, nothing fancy. But they make me happy. The reporter leaned forward. Mrs. Santos, how did it feel to be accused of theft when you were paying for the water system yourself? Maria's eyes filled with tears. I show her the bills. Many times I try to show her the bills, but she says they are fake. She says I am lying. She says, Maria paused, glancing at David, who nodded encouragingly. She says I should go back where I came from. But this is where I come from now. This is my home. What do you want people to know about this situation? Maria was quiet for a long moment. I want people to know that we are not criminals. We are not thieves. The segment ended with a shot of the sprinkler system. The irony wasn't lost on viewers. Karen had been so focused on protecting what she thought was hers that she'd never bothered to learn the truth. By evening, a GoFundMe page had been set up for Maria's legal fees. It raised $50,000 in 6 hours. Karen, meanwhile, sat in her empty house after Richard had posted her bail. Her phone buzzed constantly with notifications she was afraid to read. Her neighbors avoided eye contact. Her perfect lawn suddenly felt like a prison yard. She walked to her kitchen window and looked out at the Santos house. The sprinkler system was running its evening cycle, and she could see Maria kneeling in the flow. 3 weeks later, Karen sat in a sterile conference room at the offices of Rodriguez and Associates, staring at a stack of legal documents that seemed to grow thicker each time she looked at them. Across the table, Jennifer Walsh spread out evidence. With the methodical precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. Federal civil rights violation under Section 1983, Jennifer began, her voice calm but implacable. 3 years of documented harassment based on race and national origin. False police reports, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and now we have this. She placed a thick folder on the table. Security footage from your own cameras, Karen. Would you like to see what we found? Richard Pemberton shifted uncomfortably beside Karen. Perhaps we should discuss a settlement. No, Jennifer interrupted. I want her to see this. I want her to understand exactly what she put my clients through. She opened her laptop and clicked play. The footage was from Karen's own security system, time-stamped and crystal clear. It showed Maria Santos on a Tuesday morning carefully watering her flowers near the property line. The audio was muffled but audible. "Get away from my water, you thief," Karen's voice from off-camera. "I'm documenting this." On screen, Maria looked up, startled, then quickly gathered her watering can and retreated toward her house. But the footage continued, showing Karen approaching the flower bed with a measuring tape, photographing the sprinkler heads, and making notes in a small notebook. "Turn it off," Karen whispered. "We're just getting started." Jennifer clicked to another file. This is from September 15th, 2024. This time, David was visible in the footage, helping his mother plant new bulbs. Karen's voice was clearer this time, more aggressive. "I'm calling immigration. You people don't belong here. This is a decent neighborhood." David's response was barely audible. "Ma'am, we're American citizens. We have every right to be here. Not if you're stealing water." "You don't?" Jennifer paused the video. "Your own security system recorded you making false accusations about their legal status. Karen, this is evidence of bias-motivated harassment." Karen's face had gone pale. I was angry. I thought they were stealing from me. For 3 years, you thought wrong, and your anger doesn't excuse civil rights violations." The door opened, and Carmen Rodriguez entered with a young man Karen didn't recognize. He was carrying a laptop and a stack of files. "This is Detective Ray Chen. With the Financial Crimes Unit," Carmen announced. "We've been investigating some additional aspects of your case." Karen's blood ran cold. "Financial crimes." Detective Chen opened his laptop. "Mrs. Weatherby, we've been examining your insurance claims and city complaint records. It appears you've been very creative in your documentation." He pulled up a series of forms on his screen. July 2023. "You filed a claim with your homeowner's insurance for water damage caused by neighbor's theft of water system. You received a payout of $3,200. Richard leaned forward. "What's the issue with that?" "The issue is that it was fraud." Detective Chen replied matter-of-factly. "She claimed damages from a water system that wasn't hers, caused by actions that weren't theft. That's insurance fraud." Karen felt the room spinning. "I didn't know it wasn't mine." "But you did know there was no actual damage." Detective Chen continued. "The adjuster's report shows you claimed interior flooding, but the photos you submitted were from a different incident entirely. We traced them back to a plumbing leak you had in 2022. Jennifer smiled grimly. "It gets better, or worse, depending on your perspective." Detective Chen clicked to another document. "You also filed 17 complaints with the city's code enforcement office, claiming various violations by your neighbors. Each false complaint cost the city an average of $400 in investigative time and resources. That's nearly $7,000 in wasted taxpayer money." "Those weren't false complaints," Karen protested. "The Johnsons were playing music too loud. The decibel readings were all within legal limits." Detective Chen replied. "The Patel family's Diwali decorations were compliant with all city ordinances. The Chen family's vegetable garden was entirely legal. Every single complaint was unfounded." Carmen Rodriguez had been taking notes throughout this exchange. Now she looked up with the expression of a prosecutor who'd just been handed a gift. "Mrs. Weatherby, we're adding charges of insurance fraud and filing false reports. The total financial impact of your actions now exceeds $10,000, which makes this a felony." Karen turned to Richard with desperate eyes. "Can they do this? Can they keep adding charges?" Richard's response was grim. "Karen, you need to understand something. This isn't just about the sprinkler system anymore. They're painting a picture of systematic fraud and harassment. The original charges were just the beginning." The meeting continued for another hour, with Jennifer Walsh methodically destroying any hope Karen might have had for a quiet resolution. The evidence was overwhelming. 3 years of documented harassment, false police reports, insurance fraud, and a pattern of targeting minority neighbors. "Here's what's going to happen," Jennifer said as the meeting wound down. "We're seeking $500,000 in damages for civil rights violations, emotional distress, and punitive damages. Additionally, we want a restraining order, mandatory sensitivity training, and a public apology." Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "I can't afford that. I'll lose my house." "You should have thought of that before you spent 3 years terrorizing an elderly woman for watering her own flowers." As the lawyers packed up their documents, Karen remained seated, staring at the table. The magnitude of her situation was finally sinking in. She wasn't just facing criminal charges, she was facing financial ruin, social ostracism, and the complete destruction of the life she'd built. The drive home was silent. Richard had tried to explain the complexities of the case, but Karen had stopped listening. Her mind was stuck on one devastating fact. She'd caused all of this herself, through her own actions, her own assumptions, her own hatred. Maple Street looked different now. The reporters had moved on to other stories, but the damage remained. The Johnson family avoided eye contact when she passed their house. Mrs. Chen's grandson filmed her from his bedroom window whenever she appeared outside. The Patel family had installed additional security cameras after learning about complaints. And then there was 1245 Maple Street, where Maria Santos continued her daily routine of tending to her flowers. Now, with the quiet dignity of someone who'd been vindicated but not necessarily healed, Karen pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a long moment. Her house, which had once felt like a fortress, now felt like a prison. The perfectly manicured lawn, the precisely hung flag, the gleaming mailbox, all of it felt hollow and meaningless. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. "Mom wants to know if you're coming to dinner Sunday." I told her, probably not. Another text, this one from her former friend Nancy, saw the news about the felony charges. "Can't believe you did this to yourself." And finally, a message from Heritage Bank HR. "Your employment has been terminated effective immediately. Your final paycheck will be mailed." Karen closed her eyes and tried to remember when it all started. When did her concern about water usage become racial harassment? When did her desire for a perfect neighborhood become systematic cruelty? When did she stop seeing Maria Santos as a person and start seeing her as a threat? She couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but she understood now that it had been a series of choices, made over and over again, each one more terrible than the last. The sprinkler system clicked on for its evening cycle, and Karen watched the water arc over Maria's flowers. For 3 years, she'd seen that sight and felt anger. Now she felt something else entirely, a deep, crushing shame that threatened to overwhelm her. Her phone rang. Unknown number. "Hello. Is this Karen Weatherby?" "Yes. This is Mike Woodson from Channel 7 News. I'm doing a follow-up story on your case. Would you like to comment on the new felony charges?" Karen ended the call without responding, but her phone immediately rang again. Different number, same type of call, then another and another. By nightfall, there were news vans on Maple Street again. The story had legs. And Karen's downfall was becoming a national symbol of something larger, the weaponization of police and city services against people of color. The cost of suburban racism, the consequences of unchecked privilege. Inside her house, Karen drew the curtains and sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of reporters discussing her case on her front lawn. 3 weeks ago, she'd been a respected member of the community. Now she was a cautionary tale, a villain in a story that had spread far beyond Maple Street. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 3 years trying to make her neighbors feel unwelcome, and now she was the one who couldn't show her face in her own neighborhood. As the night deepened, Karen realized that her real punishment wasn't the criminal charges or the civil lawsuit or even the financial ruin. It was the knowledge that she'd become everything she'd always claimed to be fighting against, a threat to the peace and safety of her community. The sprinkler system shut off automatically at 9 p.m., and Maple Street fell quiet except for the low murmur of reporters and the distant sound of Maria Santos saying goodnight to her flowers in Spanish. Karen sat in her darkened living room, surrounded by the Maple Street Community Center. Hadn't seen this many people since the town hall about the proposed highway expansion in 2019. Tonight, however, the crowd wasn't here to discuss traffic patterns or zoning changes. They were here for Karen Weatherby. Order, order. Mayor Patricia Williams banged her gavel as voices rose throughout the packed auditorium. This is a public forum, and everyone will have their chance to speak. The emergency town hall had been called after 3 more neighbors came forward with their own stories of harassment by Karen. What had started as one woman's false claim about a sprinkler system had blown open a much larger conversation about discrimination in their community. David Santos sat in the front row beside his mother, both of them overwhelmed by the show of support. Behind them, nearly Residents filled every available seat, with more standing along the walls. The demographic was telling it. Wasn't just people of color who had come to speak out. White neighbors, elderly residents, young families, longtime homeowners, and recent arrivals had all turned out before we hear from community members. Mayor Williams announced, "I want to read a statement from the city attorney's office regarding our investigation into complaint procedures." She adjusted her glasses and read from a prepared document. The city has identified systemic issues in how discrimination complaints are processed. We found that complaints filed by certain residents received expedited attention, while complaints about harassment were often dismissed or delayed, effective immediately. We are implementing new oversight procedures and mandatory bias training for all city employees who handle resident complaints. A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Chen raised her hand. Does this mean the city is admitting? They enabled Karen Weatherby's harassment. Mayor Williams paused carefully. The city is committed to ensuring all residents receive equal treatment and protection under the law. It was a politician's non-answer, but the implication was clear. Karen's campaign of harassment had been successful, partly because city employees had taken her complaints seriously while dismissing concerns about her behavior. Now, the mayor continued, we'll hear from community members. Each speaker has 3 minutes. Tom Bradley was the first to approach the microphone. The soft-spoken electrician had lived on Maple Street for 8 years, and his hands shook slightly as he began to speak. My wife and I, we knew what Karen was doing to the Santos family. We heard her screaming at them, saw her following them with her camera, but we ... double quotes, his voice cracked. We didn't do anything. We told ourselves it wasn't our business, that it would blow over. I want to apologize to Maria and David for our cowardice. We should have stood up for you years ago. A woman in the middle section stood up. My name is Sarah Kim, and I live on Oak Street, 2 blocks from Maple. Karen Weatherby called the police on my teenage son last summer, claiming he was casing houses while he was walking our dog. My son is Korean American. He was wearing his high school track team uniform and had lived in this neighborhood for 5 years. The police knew him by name, but they still had to respond to her call. The stories continued, each one painting a picture of systematic harassment that went far. Beyond the Santos family, Dr. Patel described how Karen had campaigned to have his family's Diwali decorations banned as fire hazards. The Johnsons talked about noise complaints filed every time they had friends over for barbecues. Mrs. Abdullah spoke about Karen's petition to ban foreign cooking smells from the neighborhood. She made our lives hell, said James Johnson, his voice tight with controlled anger. But the worst part wasn't even what she did to us. It was watching what she did to Mrs. Santoson, elderly woman who just wanted to tend her garden, and knowing we were all too afraid to stop it when Maria Santos approached the microphone. The entire auditorium fell silent. She moved slowly. Using a walking stick David had insisted she start carrying after the stress of the past month had affected her balance. My English is not perfect, she began, her voice barely carrying to the back of the room. But I want to say something important. She paused, gathering her thoughts. I come to America in 1987. My husband, he worked construction. We save money, we buy a small house, we try to be good neighbors. When my husband died 5 years ago, I think maybe I moved back to El Salvador. But my son, he say, Mama, this is home now. Her voice grew stronger. I plant flowers because flowers don't speak English or Spanish. Flowers don't care what color skin you have. Flowers just need water and sun and love. For 3 years, I give them water from my system, and they grow beautiful. She looked directly at the section where Karen would have been sitting if she'd had the courage to attend. Mrs. Weatherby, she'll look at my flowers and see stealing. But I look at her flowers and see they need love too. Maybe if she spend less time angry and more time growing things, she'll understand we are not so different. The silence that followed was profound. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. Others joined in, until the entire auditorium was giving Maria Santos a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. When the applause died down, Jennifer Walsh stepped to the microphone. I'm here representing the Santos family in their civil rights lawsuit, but tonight I'm speaking as a lawyer who's seen too many cases like this one. She held up a thick folder. This isn't an isolated incident. Across the country, we're seeing the weaponization of police, code enforcement, and HOA regulations against people of color. Karen Weatherby's case is unusual only because her own security footage documented her behavior so thoroughly. Jennifer's voice hardened. But let's be clear about what happened here. This wasn't a misunderstanding about property lines. This was 3 years of racial harassment, documented threats, false police reports, insurance fraud, and the systematic use of city resources to terrorize a family. The fact that it took this long for anyone to intervene is a failure of this entire community. The criticism stung because it was accurate. Murmurs of discomfort rippled through the crowd. However, Jennifer continued, I've also seen something remarkable over the past month. This community has rallied around the Santos family in ways that give me hope. You've raised money for their legal fees, offered emotional support, and most importantly, you've started having the difficult conversations about how we allow discrimination to flourish through our silence. Near the back of the auditorium, a door opened quietly. Karen Weatherby slipped inside, wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap pulled low over her face. She'd been sitting in her car in the parking lot for an hour, debating whether to come inside. Now, hearing her name spoken with such venom, she almost turned around and left. But something kept her rooted in place. Maybe it was curiosity about what her neighbors really thought of her. Maybe it was masochistic self-punishment. Or maybe, for the first time in 3 years, she actually wanted to listen instead of talk. The next speaker was Nancy Morrison, Karen's former friend and bridge partner. I've known Karen Weatherby for 6 years, Nancy began, her voice shaking with emotion. I thought I knew her. We had coffee every Tuesday, we organized the library fundraiser together, our kids played on the same soccer team. Nancy's composure cracked, but I also heard her use racial slurs about her neighbors. I listened to her conspiracy theories about those people bringing down property values. I watched her become obsessed with that sprinkler system, and I did nothing. I told myself she was just stressed, just protective of her property. I made excuses for behavior I knew was wrong. She wiped her eyes with a tissue. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm saying that Karen Weatherby didn't become a racist overnight. She expressed these views in private for years, and those of us who heard her are complicit in what happened to the Santos family. We could have challenged her. We could have stopped being her friend. We could have warned her targets. We chose comfort over courage. Karen felt like she was watching her own funeral. Every speaker was someone she'd known, someone she'd considered a friend, or at least a friendly neighbor. And each one was describing her as a monster. But as the testimony continued, something unexpected happened. Karen began to see herself through their eyes, not as the neighborhood protector she'd imagined herself to be, but as the very threat she'd claimed to be fighting against. The final speaker was Dr. Elizabeth Harper, a retired professor who lived 3 streets over. She was 84 years old and had been a civil rights activist since the 1960s. I've lived in this community for 40 years, she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd seen history repeat itself. I've watched neighborhoods change, watched families come and go, watched America slowly learn to be better than it was. She paused, looking around the room. What happened to Maria Santos isn't new. It's the same fear, the same hatred, the same willful ignorance that I've been fighting my entire adult life. The only thing that's different is that now we have security cameras to document it. Dr. Harper's voice rose slightly. But I want to say something about justice. Real justice isn't just punishing Karen Weatherby. Real justice is making sure this never happens again. It's examining our own biases, challenging discrimination when we see it, and building a community where Maria Santos can water her flowers without fear. She looked directly toward. 6 months later, Karen Weatherby stood in courtroom for B of the Federal District Court, waiting for Judge Rebecca Martinez to deliver her sentence. The plea agreement had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, guilty to federal civil rights violations, insurance fraud, and filing false police reports. The criminal penalties were manageable: 2 years probation, community service, mandatory counseling. It was the civil lawsuit that would destroy her financially. But something had changed in Karen during those 6 months, something that began the night she stood in the back of that auditorium and heard her community describe the monster she'd become. Your Honor, Karen's new lawyer, a young public defender named Marcus Webb, addressed the court. My client would like to make a statement before sentencing. Judge Martinez looked up from her papers. In her 15 years on the bench, she'd presided over hundreds of hate crime cases. Most defendants either maintained their innocence or offered hollow apologies written by their lawyers. She was curious to see which category Karen Weatherby would fall into. Karen stood slowly. She'd lost 20 pounds over the past months. Her designer clothes replaced by a simple black dress she'd bought at Target. Her face was bare of makeup, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "Your Honor, I'd like to address Mrs. Santos directly, if that's okay." In the gallery, Maria Santos sat between David and Jennifer Walsh. She'd aged visibly during the legal proceedings, the stress taking its toll on her health. But her eyes were alert as they met Karen's across the courtroom. "Mrs. Santos," Karen began, her voice barely above a whisper. "For 6 months, I've been trying to find words that could somehow undo what I did to you. I've written letters I'll never send, practiced speeches I'll never give, because I finally understand that some things can't be fixed with words." Karen's voice strengthened slightly. "I terrorized you for 3 years. I made you afraid in your own home, afraid to tend your garden, afraid to exist peacefully in a neighborhood where you belonged more than I ever did. I used my privilege as a weapon against you, and I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it." She paused, wiping her eyes with a tissue. "But I want you to know that you changed me. Not the arrest, not the lawsuit, not the humiliation you did. When I watched you forgive me at that town hall meeting, when you talked about flowers needing love regardless of who tends them, you showed me who I could have been all along." Maria's expression remained neutral, but David leaned forward slightly, listening intently. "I've been attending bias counseling for 4 months now," Karen continued. "Not because the court ordered it, they hadn't yet, but because I needed to understand how I became someone who could hurt an innocent person and call it justice. What I learned is that my racism wasn't born from ignorance, it was born from choice. Every day for 3 years, I chose to see you as a threat instead of a neighbor. I chose to believe my assumptions instead of asking questions. I chose hatred over humanity." Jennifer Walsh found herself grudgingly impressed. This wasn't the defiant, self-righteous woman who'd been arrested 6 months earlier. "The counseling helped me trace it back," Karen said. "When my father lost his job to factory closures when I was 12, I heard him blame immigrants. When my ex-husband left me for a younger woman, I blamed everyone except myself. When I felt powerless in my own life, I found people who had less power than me and convinced myself they were the problem." She looked directly at Maria again. "But that's explanation, not excuse. You didn't deserve to pay for my failures, my fears, or my father's racism. You deserved to live in peace and tend your flowers without some broken woman taking her pain out on you." The courtroom was completely silent now. Even the court reporter had stopped typing to listen. "Can't undo the damage. I know sorry isn't enough, but I want to tell you what I'm going to do with the rest of my life, if you'll let me." Karen pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "I've sold my house. All the proceeds, $180,000 after the mortgage are going to 3 places, $100,000. To pay your legal fees and provide compensation for what I put you through, $50,000 to establish a community garden in the lot behind the community center, where anyone can grow flowers or vegetables regardless of where they came from, and $30,000 to fund bias training for city employees and police officers." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Jennifer Walsh's eyebrows rose. "This wasn't part of any plea agreement. I'm moving to a small apartment across town," Karen continued. "I've started volunteering with the Immigrant Services Center downtown, helping with paperwork and translation services. Not because I'm trying to buy redemption, but because it's what I should have been doing all along instead of attacking people who needed help." She took a shaky breath. "Mrs. Santos, I spent 3 years trying to make you feel like you didn't belong here. But the truth is, you belong here more than I do. You made this neighborhood more beautiful with your flowers. You showed grace when I showed cruelty. You responded to my hatred with wisdom. You are what America is supposed to be, and I'm ashamed it took destroying your peace for me to see that." Karen's voice broke completely now. "I'm not asking for your forgiveness because I know I'll never deserve it. I'm asking for your permission to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the mercy you showed me when you could have demanded my complete destruction." She sat down heavily, emotionally drained. The courtroom remained silent for a long moment before Judge Martinez spoke. "Mrs. Santos, would you like to respond?" Maria stood slowly, her son's hand on her arm for support. She walked to the front of the courtroom with the same careful dignity she'd shown while tending her flowers. "Mrs. Weatherby," she said, her accent still heavy, but her voice clear, "you say you don't deserve forgiveness. Maybe that is true. Maybe forgiveness is not something we deserve, but something we choose to give." Karen looked up through her tears. "For 3 years, I water my flowers, and I pray for you," Maria continued. "Not because I am saint, but because hatred is like poison. It kill the one who carry it more than the one it meant for. I see you become more angry, more afraid, more alone each day. I feel sorry for you, even when you hurt me." She paused, considering her words carefully. "You ask for permission to be a better person. I cannot give you that permission. Only you can choose who you want to be. But I can tell you this, the woman who stand here today, who sell her house to help people. She hurt, who work to fix system. She break this woman, is welcome in my garden any time." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of Karen's quiet sobbing. Several people in the gallery were wiping their eyes. Judge Martinez cleared her throat. "Mrs. Weatherby, I've seen a lot of defendants in my courtroom. Most are sorry they got caught. Some are sorry they hurt people. Very few are willing to sacrifice everything they have to make amends. Your actions over the past 6 months suggest genuine remorse and commitment to change." She looked down at her sentencing guidelines. The federal sentencing recommendation is 18 months incarceration. However, given your plea agreement, your cooperation with the investigation, and most importantly, your demonstrable efforts to make amends, I'm sentencing you to 2 years supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, specifically with immigrant services organizations, and mandatory completion of a restorative justice program. She leaned forward. "Mrs. Weatherby, the real test of your transformation won't be in this courtroom. It will be in how you live every day for the rest of your life. You've been given a second chance that many people don't get. Don't waste it." As the court adjourned, Karen remained seated, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. She'd expected prison, financial ruin, complete social exile. Instead, she'd been given an opportunity to rebuild not her old life, but a new one based on different principles. David Santos approached her as she was gathering her papers. "Karen," she looked up, surprised. "David, I thank you for letting your mother speak. I know that was hard." "It was her choice," he said simply. "But I wanted to tell you something. The community garden idea, my mother loves it. She wants to help design it." Karen's eyes filled with tears again. She would do that after everything. She says the best way to fight hatred is to grow something beautiful where it used to live. 3 months later, Karen knelt in the rich soil of the new Maple Street Community Garden, her hands dirty with earth as she helped Maria Santos plant marigolds in the plot designated for flowers from around the world. The lot that had once been empty and overlooked was now a vibrant space where neighbors of all backgrounds came to grow food and flowers together. "Like this?" Karen asked, carefully spacing the small plants according to Maria's instructions. "See, very good," Maria replied, then corrected herself with a smile. "Yes, very good." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, 2 women who had been enemies, now united in the simple act of growing something beautiful. Karen's hands were no longer manicured, and soft months of volunteering had calloused them, made them strong. "Mrs. Santos," Karen said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. How did you know that I could change? I mean, how did you see something in me that I couldn't see in myself?" Maria sat back on her heels, considering the question. "You know what I see when I look at flowers, Beth?